We are recording here. So yeah, welcome everyone to our U.S. Law Career Panel. My name is Kristen and I am the North American Opportunity Manager at the Career Center. And my role is really to work with students and alumni and different partners in the U.S. along with our U.S. development team to help raise the awareness of careers and opportunities and internships in the United States. And so today we have a very exciting panel talking all about law in the U.S. But before we get started, I am going to quick turn it over to Leah to introduce the U.S. development team.
Thanks so much, Kristen, and I apologize. My camera just went out, so I'm having some slight technical issues, but welcome everyone. I do want to quickly introduce myself and the U.S. development team before we jump in. I am Leah Dalton, and I'm the manager of alumni and family engagement for the U.S. I work remotely from Maryland, along with 3 other colleagues with us who are based in the U.S. as well. So we have Catherine Humphreys, who's our head of development, and she is in Philadelphia. We have Lily Wen, who is a gift officer in California, covering the western half of the country, and Moira Sharkey, who is another gift officer based in Massachusetts, covering the eastern half of the country. So as a team, we work together to strengthen and engage our community of alumni, parents, and supporters in the U.S., and we work to build our network through events like this, along with growing philanthropic support for the university from our U.S. community. So again, thank you all, and thank you to our panelists. I will pop our contact information in the chat in case you ever want to get in touch, and I will get back over to you, Kristen.
Great. So we have a little under an hour here together, and how our time together is going to work is I'm going to have each one of the panelists introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their story, and then I have a few questions that we're going to go through, and then I will leave some space at the end if there are any questions from the audience. Otherwise, I'll just keep rolling with the questions. So I am going to turn it over to our panelists. Would love for you to introduce yourself, what you're up to at the moment, and a bit about your career path. So Sheila, can I start with you?
Yes, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone in the States. Good evening to everyone in St. Andrews. My name is Sheila Bautista. I graduated from St. Andrews in 1999 with a degree in modern history. I'm originally from the United States, so after graduation, I went back to the DC area where I worked for 2 years before I went to law school. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. It did take a couple of years before I decided to go to law school. In the meantime, I worked at a startup.com. Back then, the internet was so new, it was considered a .com. And I went to law school thinking I wanted to do something in internet law. The internet was a new thing back then. And as a modern history student, I wanted to be part of something new. I thought it was, it would have been historical to be part of something new. And that's what I originally intended to do when I applied to law school. I went to Boston College Law School, and my career path changed based on what happened then. I was assigned to a mentor who gave me career advice that changed the path of my career. She suggested to me that when I interned in my law school summers, I should seek an internship with a judge, volunteer to work for a judge, because nobody ever says no to free help. Based on that advice, I applied to judges in Massachusetts who graduated from my law school. I ended up interning with a federal judge. Federal judges in Massachusetts oversee both civil and criminal cases. So when I interned with her, I was able to see both civil and criminal dockets, and based on that experience, I decided that I wanted to pursue criminal law. I thought it was the most interesting law. The prosecutors who appeared before her in the courtroom were talented attorneys. And over the course of my time, I realized I wanted to do public service. I owe my education to an international organization my mother worked for, and I thought that pursuing a career in public service would be my way of giving back to the community. So I decided that first summer after law school that I wanted to be a prosecutor. So the next summer, I interned at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston. When I graduated from law school, I tried to work as a prosecutor in Manhattan, but nobody hired me. So the next best thing was to work for the New York City Law Department. It was the same amount of litigation experience as I wanted. I really wanted to be in the courtroom. I really wanted to be a trial attorney. And when you work for the city, they used to get 7,000 lawsuits a year. So there was a lot of trial courtroom experience that I was able to get working for the city. But after 4 years as a trial attorney, I learned that my natural strengths weren't in front of a jury. My natural strengths were the writing skills that I've had since I was young, and legal research. So I realized that the best thing for me would be to become an appeals attorney, because as an attorney doing appeals, you do a lot of legal research and writing. So 4 years after being a trial attorney, I discovered that the Manhattan DA's office was seeking lateral attorneys in their appeals division, and it sounded like the perfect job for me. It was the combination of the criminal law that I was always interested in. Appeals were the natural skills that I had. So in 2008, I started working at the Manhattan DA's office in the appeals division. 13 years later, I am still here. I love it. It's my perfect job. It's a very rewarding career serving the public. The work that I do in particular is a great opportunity to work on cases that become precedent and law for the entire state of New York. I've had cases that have gone to the Court of Appeals in New York, which is the equivalent of the Supreme Court, but for New York State. And that's my favorite part of this work, is working on cases that have an impact on not just this case, but constitutional law and other cases throughout the state. So that's my career path, and I'm happy to answer any questions later in this discussion.
Wow, thanks, Sheila. Much appreciated. James, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, and welcome everybody to the panel. I'm very excited to be part of this, and I'm looking forward to a terrific discussion about the possibility of following a career in the law. So I'll give you a bit of personal background. I was at St. Andrews between 1981 and 1985. So I arrived at St. Andrews just under 40 years ago, if you can believe that. And to my considerable embarrassment, I've only been back to St. Andrews once in the past 40 years, but I do plan to go back this summer if possible, COVID-19 permitting. So I graduated in 1985 with a degree in French and Spanish, and actually spent my third year, honors year, at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, which is about as different as you can imagine from St. Andrews. Spent a wonderful, very relaxing year there, and then came back and finished up at St. Andrews in 1985. Immediately after St. Andrews, I went to Princeton University in New Jersey and did a master's degree there. My second MA, since obviously my first degree at St. Andrews was an MA, and then for a number of reasons decided to go to law school. And I was at NYU for my JD. I liked law school so much, I decided to go back to law school for an LLM at the Harvard Law School, and then practiced. I've been practicing ever since. So been practicing for about 30 years now, almost. All I've known is private practice. I've only been to 3 firms in my career, all of them very, very big firms. I was at Morrison & Foerster in San Francisco for 5 years. I was then at Cooley Godward, also in San Francisco, for about 7 years. And I've been at the Morgan Lewis firm in San Francisco for the past almost 17 years now. Morgan Lewis, as I'm sure everybody knows, is a very, very large firm. Probably the largest firm in the US, if not the world right now. We are a massive firm, which confers certain advantages as well as disadvantages. But I'm happy practicing in that context, and plan to remain at Morgan Lewis until I retire, which hopefully will be in the not too distant future. I'm not one of these crazy Americans that insist on working at his or her desk until they keel over. I'm English, European, so my view on work is less fanatical. Anyway, leaving that aside, in terms of my practice, I've actually practiced in a number of different areas. When I started out at Morrison & Foerster, I spent the first couple of years working in land use environmental litigation, and spent almost 2 years focusing exclusively on litigation involving the San Francisco International Airport and the international terminal that was being built there. It was held up by a number of lawsuits, and I spent 2 years working on that pretty much exclusively, and we were successful. And the terminal was built without a problem. At that point, somebody discovered that I could speak Spanish fluently and decided to send me down to Mexico and Argentina to work on a number of corporate deals. By nature, I'm more of a litigator than a corporate lawyer, but somehow the need was there, and so I spent a number of years working on some pretty complex deals and privatizations in Latin America, particularly Mexico and Argentina, but other countries as well. And then at some point, somebody noticed that I had an expertise in immigration law because, of course, I had to go through that process myself, get my H-1B visa to work at Morrison & Foerster. And there was a need for immigration services. So I kind of jumped on that bandwagon, and that's what I've been doing ever since, business immigration law. Been doing that exclusively at Morgan Lewis. So that's my background. Looking forward to discuss, how St. Andrews education can help as a springboard to law school in the US. So look forward to our discussion in the next 45 minutes or so.
Fantastic. Thank you, James. Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. And it's really a pleasure to join Sheila and James today talking about careers in law. I was at St. Andrews from 93 to 97 and graduated with an MA in International Relations and Economics. My mother's British, my father American, and part of the reason I wound up in St. Andrews to spend some time with my Scottish cousins. But I came back to the States after St. Andrews and started training horses with my sister, which I did for about 9 months, until a friend of mine mentioned that there was an internship available at a think tank, the Strategic and International Studies. And the internship was with the Global Organized Crime Project doing counterterrorism and counter-narcotics work. And those were 2 issues that I'd focused on during my time studying international relations at St. Andrews. So I jumped at the opportunity, and the internship turned into a research position. And while I was at CSIS, I considered a career in the think tank world or spending some time on the Hill, and ultimately decided instead to go to law school. I started off at George Washington University and then transferred to Georgetown, Georgetown has a far better international law program. And I thought I would focus on international project finance and maybe practice in the Middle East. I'd grown up in Dubai. And so I focused on Sharia compliant project finance. I got my JD and then got my LLM also at Georgetown right away. And as luck would have it, I was looking for positions at major project finance firms like Allen & Overy, a couple of other European firms, and a few US firms. And a friend contacted me about a clerkship that was opened up. A judge had been confirmed by the Federal Circuit, and one of her clerks that she planned to hire for the year had dropped out for health reasons. So I applied for that position and got a clerkship clerking for a judge of the Court of Federal Claims, which hears claims against the federal government. And I found the area of law so fascinating. Learning how it's really work, how they procure the things that they need, whether it be F-35s or pens and paper, that I decided to pursue that path in law, and started off working at Hogan Lovells and went to a U.S. firm, Jenner & Block. Then I spent about 7 years at Kroll & Mooring, and then finally I've been at my current firm for 7 years, Bassberry & Sims. I joined this firm 7 years ago to help a friend establish a new government contracts practice at a Tennessee-based firm. But it's been a terrific career. I'm a partner at Bass now. Do a lot of work with defense contractors, some government contract litigation, challenging awards of contracts, claims against the government where the government doesn't pay contractors what they're entitled to. But it's been a terrific career. And one of the things that you probably noticed in my discussion of my career path is that at almost every step, friends that I've had throughout my life have played very important roles in identifying opportunities and presenting opportunities, whether it's the clerkship, the internship I had at CSIS, and the transitions from various firms. Each one had a lot of reasons for them, but one of the things that really drove them were the relationships that I had with people at those firms. So I look forward to talking more about career paths and answering questions. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. I'm going to go back to Sheila. So we're just going to jump into a couple of questions here. And then just for everyone in the audience, I'm going to ask each one of our panelists a question and then turn it over to you all to ask questions. So please do be thinking about questions or discussion topics you'd like to bring to the table. So Sheila, I'm going to go to you. I want you to talk a little bit, tell us about when someone's considering law school, like what are the things that students or prospective law school attendees should know and should consider as they're taking into account going to law school?
There are 3 pieces of advice that I regularly give for people who are considering law school. Number 1 is people deciding to go to law school should have a very clear idea of what they want to do with that law school degree. A lot of people have a liberal arts degree and don't know what to do with it and go to law school, and they end up floundering once they're there. Law school is a professional school, and the most success you can get out of your legal degree, your law degree, will be if you have a clear idea of what it is you want to do with that degree. You could be like me. You could be like me and think you're going to do one thing with your degree and end up doing something completely different. That's fine. But as long as you know you want something that you want to do, that's key before you start law school. Number 2 is to examine, like, what are your personal strengths and what do you like to do? There's so many different things that you can study in the law. And there's a lot of people who, when they go to law school, they think they need to study a certain number, like corporations or certain courses that'll be on the bar exam. But if that's not what you want to do, then I don't see the point. I think as long as you stick to classes that you like, stick to areas of law that you like, that again will lead to success. When I interview a person for my office, I look at what kind of courses they take. And if the courses they take are consistent with their interests and consistent with the mission of my office, then that makes them a more attractive candidate. If you are into corporations, if you're into international law, if that's the career you want to pursue, then take those courses, and that'll make you an attractive candidate to those people hiring. My 3rd piece of advice is to try to develop a mentor in your career somewhere. I think the most successful people are successful because they have advice from people who have trodden the path ahead of them. Those people give great advice, and as long as if you have, the wisdom of that experience helping you along, that's another key to success. You would be surprised how many people you meet out there who are genuinely helpful and eager to help people. Even people they don't know. The mentor that I met who gave me my advice, I only met her twice in my life, and she gave me helpful advice, and I try to do the same to pay it forward. So those are my 3 pieces of advice for success in a law career.
Yeah, love it. I'm hearing like a clear why are you showing up, some direction, and then asking for support and finding that support along the way. James, Richard, are there things that as you think about your decision to go to law school that you would add to that?
And I think that's terrific advice. I think in applying to law school in the US, it really doesn't matter what you studied undergrad. Law school, there are a number of people who had studied philosophy, fine art, chemical engineering, and they all did quite well, regardless of what they'd done undergrad. I think what's needed is really a real interest in the law and knowing, as Sheila said, what you want to do in the future. From my perspective, I found I was actually quite well prepared for law school because of my St. Andrews education. In law school, you really only do one thing, and that's read texts, analyze them, and then construct an interpretation of them and defend that interpretation. So basically everything you do it revolves around reading written texts. So as I mentioned, my degree was in French and Spanish. I also did a year of moral philosophy and a year of practical theology over in St. Mary's. And I found those helped me as well tremendously in being able to read a text and understand what that text is saying, identify any kind of contradictions or ambiguities in the text, and then construct an interpretation of that text and defend it, which you had to do every week in your tutorials. And my experience doing that really reminded me of the Socratic method in first year of law school, where you're called on by a professor who sadistically grills you on a case, on written text, with the objective, it seemed to me, of making you look stupid. And in many cases, the professor succeeded, with me at least. But I found that my experience, in the Socratic method was very similar to my experience at St. Andrews, which was, basically reading your essay and then having the lecturer or professor kind of grill you on that. So I found that I was actually very, very well prepared because of that. The obvious difference between the Scottish educational system and the American educational system at the baccalaureate level is that in Scotland, you study fewer subjects, but you study them more intensively. And that prepared me, I think, very well compared to some of my law school classmates who had done their undergraduate degrees in the US. And I think I speak from an informed perspective because, as I mentioned earlier, I did spend a year studying at UCLA. And wonderful school, UCLA, but I found the classes very, very easy indeed because I was very, very well prepared at St. Andrews. So to sort of cut a long story short, I think coming from St. Andrews, the top university in Scotland, I would like to think, and coming from that system, I think you will find you're very, very well equipped to handle the rigors of law school.
Yeah, amazing.
I just wanted to add, I agree with those great points from Sheila and James. I think St. Andrews does prepare you very well for law school. One of the things that I found easy in law school was that 100% of my grade was the final exam in my courses in law school. My American friends, or my friend of American universities, panicked at the idea the entire grade would be based on one paper. But if for anyone who'd been to St. Andrews, it was run of the mill, pretty ordinary stuff. But one of the things that I think is very important, just to follow on to a point that Sheila made, is just self-reflection. Think hard what it is that you like and what you want to accomplish in your career. Law school is 3 years long, and you would hate to find yourself 3 or 4 years into a career law firm after law school, recognizing that you don't like being a lawyer. So really think about what it means to be a lawyer. Think about the area you want to go into. As Sheila mentioned, knowing what area of law you want to practice is important because it's an important issue in the system of law schools. My wife works for the Inspector General of the Department of Health and Human Services here in the US. Her office generally will hire people who went to law schools that have a healthcare program and a healthcare focus. If you went to a law school that does not have a healthcare program, you're going to be not an attractive candidate. As Sheila mentioned, if you've shown you've taken the classes and the courses that match up with the place you're hoping to go interview for, that's going to help a lot. And one of the ways you can do that, I think, is to maybe spend a year or two out of school after university. I worked at a think tank after St. Andrews, but a number of people who've gone into careers in law worked at law firms or worked as interns for judges. So they got a real view of what being a lawyer is. There's a lot of misperceptions about what an attorney is based on TV shows and movies and stories you hear about lawyers. But if you have a chance, really learn what it is to be an attorney. I think that's tremendously important. And when you're interviewing for jobs at law firms, make sure you know what they do. I interviewed someone at a top university just 2 years ago, and he expressed a tremendous interest in the environmental law practice at my law firm. We don't have an environmental law practice. He didn't get a call back, and we didn't continue interviewing that candidate. But then just one last thing about law school and career paths, and this is also to follow on with something that was said earlier, be flexible. I got my JD and then LLM with a focus on Sharia compliant project finance, thinking I was going to be a project finance attorney. And then I had a chance to clerk for a judge who was a leader in the government contracts bar in the United States. She introduced me to a lot of wonderful people who practice at the bar, top law firms with that practice area. And I took the opportunity because I saw an interest and an opening. And after thinking through it a lot, I realized it aligned with my interest. The government, the U.S. government, and many other governments using project finance techniques to finance road systems and other things, public schools in some countries, including I think the UK. So I found a sort of an intersection of an interest that I'd had for a long time with government contract law. And as long as you remain open to those opportunities, you'll be better able to spot them as they come along.
Yeah, amazing. Yes, absolutely. One of the things that I kind of want to jump back to here is what James was talking about, and Richard, you sort of picked this up as well, is the skills that you've gained from your time in St. Andrews, and what are the skills that you've picked up maybe from the classroom, maybe from some kind of involvement outside of the classroom that you had here that made your law career and your time at law school perhaps a bit easier? I know we talked about being able to defend an argument, to see, you know, gaps in an argument. And then we also talked about, Richard, you had mentioned not being freaked out by, you know, having one paper, one exam be your grade. Are there other things that come to mind on that? Sheila, I don't know if you have anything to jump in there on that with. Not to put you on the spot.
I totally echo what James said about how St. Andrews, like, it is very intensive course. Like, you study a topic very intensely and deeper than I never went to an American university, so I don't know. But I believe that we study topics deeper than they do at American universities. That's definitely come into my work in appeals. In appeals, there are specific issues that I, you know, deeply delve into. I have deep knowledge of a few issues as opposed to a broad general knowledge. So that is one way that the St. Andrews education has helped me in my particular career.
Yeah, expertise in a particular area for sure. Anything else to add on that one?
One other thing, the focus on writing, you know, as James said, is so tremendously important. I mean, as an attorney, you're an advocate, and your written and oral advocacy are how you make your living. Very, very few lawyers stand up in court in front of a jury or in front of a judge and argue a case. And even those that do only do on occasion. It's a rare thing if you work at a big US firm or a big UK firm for that matter. And so your written advocacy is really the most important skill that you have as an attorney. So the fact that you get to write so much at St. Andrews, learn how to express yourself, learn how compelling arguments, those are really vital skills in a career in law. So you know, focus on your craft, and St. Andrews gives you that opportunity. And I find that lawyers that really spend time thinking about their writing and editing do much better than those who don't. So
yeah, amazing, thank you. So Richard, I'm going to kind of turn it back to you, but I would love for any of you to answer this question. I'm thinking of one of the things, Richard, that you had mentioned earlier to me was the importance of building a foundation and getting that experience early on. And so I'm curious to know from your perspectives, if you were looking at a CV from a student who maybe just graduated from law school and you're about to hire them, what would be the kinds of things that you would hope to see on that CV that you would say, yes, this person is a successful candidate or will be a successful candidate? I know, Sheila, you had mentioned some classes, but I'm wondering, what are some of those other aspects that are important?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm going to look at is the law school that the person went to and the undergraduate school that they went to. If they went to St. Andrews, obviously, I'll look very carefully at the resume. But you know, law school, if you've gone to a top 20 law school, that's a strong signal to whoever's reviewing your CV that you're a strong student. Right? So don't underestimate the importance of going to the highest law school you can. When you apply to law schools, if you get into one that's ranked 50th and one that's ranked 5th, there's really no choice. And even the one that's ranked 50th has maybe a focus on the areas of the law that you may be a little more interested in. Going to higher ranked law school is going to open up a lot more doors. So that's the first thing I look at. Second is grades. Did you do well in law school? And you know, as Sheila mentioned, it's a professional degree. And you ought to know what you want out of it when you get there, and you ought to be mature enough to focus on your classes and be able to do well. If you don't, that's an issue. You're probably not going to get an interview at a top law firm if you have below a 3.0. Almost certainly not. Below a 3.5, probably not at a 20 law firm. You've got to be close to the top of your class to get an interview at a top firm. But one of the main things that all firms, I think, look at is writing. If you go to law school, try to get on a law journal. And it's just another signal that you've honed your writing skills and you're going to be more useful as a young attorney than someone who's not had that additional focus on written work. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, know what the law firm you're interviewing with does and does well, and know a little bit about the bio of the person you're interviewing with. I mean, there's so much information available on the web about people's careers and backgrounds. Make sure to research people and research the firm before you go into that meeting, because rest assured, the firm that you're interviewing with has done that to you. They're going to know quite a bit about you, which gets to one other quick point. Careful what you post on social media. I know people have to be focused on that in a way that I graduated in 97. I think St. Andrews had one dingy computer lab in the basement of a 400-year-old building with 12 outdated PCs at the time. I'm sure it's much more advanced now, but we didn't have anything like concern about what we posted on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or anything like that. But be sensitive about that. That whatever you post is forever. And for law firms, that could be a new. And if you go into a government career and need to get security clearance, that can be an issue. So be sensitive to that. But those are some of the things that I would look at.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
Let me just add to what Richard said. I think he's absolutely right as far as the quality of the school, the law school you go to. So looking at this from a big firm perspective, which is the only perspective I have, it is very important if you're applying as a law school student or as a recent graduate. If you want an interview at one of these big firms, you're going to have to go to one of the top schools. Maybe not the top 5, maybe not top 10, but certainly, what are ranked, viewed sort of putatively as being the top 15. The reality is, if you didn't go to one of those schools, your resume is not even going to be read. Probably, it's regrettable, but that's the reality of the situation. It changes, of course, if you've been practicing for a year or longer and you're lateraling in. At that point, your experience becomes much more important than the law school you went to. So name recognition is very important. And I should add in that regard that there may be concern that St. Andrews doesn't have name recognition in the US. I think that's not true. I honestly don't think it's ever been true. So when I was applying to law school 30 years ago, I think St. Andrews was well known by the admissions committee. And certainly nobody was going to say, well, we're not going to take this person because we've never heard of his or her school. That was not the case. St. Andrews has always been very well known. The idea that it only became known after Prince William attended there, I think, is a complete myth. And I think schools are also aware of the quality of the undergraduate education you receive as a St. Andrews student. So if that's a concern, I don't think it should be a concern at all on your part.
Hi, I'd like to offer my perspective for anyone who's interested in jobs in public service. What I look for is, as I mentioned before, the courses, but also if you are interested in public service, I think what I look for and what other organizations might also look for is that commitment to public service. Prior experience in public service, interning, volunteering is something that I find very attractive on the resume, because anyone who has volunteered their time to contribute to the community is someone who I think is dedicated to public service. And while the aspiration to top law schools is definitely a good one, it opens a lot of doors. For anyone who may not necessarily qualify for a top law school, my advice to people is to, if you know what city you might want to practice law in, I would advise going to a law school in that city, because employers in a city are familiar with all the different law schools and all the different law schools in that city and the quality of some of the students that can come from the different law schools. Also, alumni organizations at schools can be very helpful. My law school's alumni organization has graduates all over the country, and they can provide very helpful connections to jobs. If you go to Harvard or if you go to Columbia, that opens a lot of doors. If you go to other schools, that doesn't open as many doors, but the alumni organizations of some of those schools can provide very helpful connections.
So one last thing to mention about resumes. We talked about making sure you top school, law review, all those things. Don't underestimate, though, the impact of putting sort of personal, quirky things on your resume. I got my clerkship at the Court of Federal Claims in part because I had on my resume that I played lacrosse for Scotland and got to play in the European Championships while I was a student over at St. Andrews. The judge that I clerked for, her son was a lacrosse player and went to university and played lacrosse at the University of Delaware. So she saw that, and we immediately had something to talk about. And that was part of the reason I had good grades, had gone to a great university, had some good work experience as well. But that was one of the things that really caught her attention. So, if you have an interesting hobby that you pursued or accomplishment like that, include that on your resume as well.
Yeah, so good. I'm hearing again these themes of having the self-reflection to know where is it that you're heading. And of course, we've heard from your career paths, particularly Sheila and Richard, like that's changed a lot. Well, even James as well, like taking up all these different projects, but knowing with intention where you're going and making a conscious choice towards that. So I'm just going to ask one more quick question, and then I'll open it up to our audience. Now, I know that law is, it's a very old discipline, and it's changing all of the time, and it's new and exciting, and new precedents being set all the time. Tell me a little bit about, broad strokes, what are some of the trends or maybe changes that you're seeing in the field of law that students should be aware of?
Let me give you my experience with business and immigration law, which is what I specialize in. The law and the regulations really haven't changed that much in the past 30 years or so, probably because it's so difficult to pass immigration legislation. What changes is the enforcement of the law and the regulations by the various agencies that are involved in the process, and their attitude to the law is really colored by the presidential administration, the executive administration. And we've just gone through a horrendous 4 years with the Trump administration. And it was frankly very, very difficult to practice as an immigration lawyer because you were dealing with agencies that were just implacably hostile and were looking for reasons to deny petitions and applications that clearly were approvable. So I guess my point is that the political process does impact your day-to-day practice of the law, and you have to be flexible and adapt to that, and understand that a project that might have been completed quite easily in an hour or so to the satisfaction of an immigration agency is now going to take you much, much longer, and it's going to be much, much more expensive to the client. Because a lot of this is not just understanding what's going to be required in terms of your time and effort, but how much you're going to charge the client for this, because that's a very, very important part of what we do. And a lot of what I've been doing in the past 4 years is really explaining to clients why my services are so much more expensive than they were 4 years ago, and that's because of the impact of the presidential administration. So I'm hoping for a reprieve of sorts for the next 4 years under the Biden administration. Who knows if that will happen? That's been, something that's really profoundly impacted my practice over the past 4 years.
Yeah, very interesting how those all connect together, for sure. Sheila, Richard?
Go ahead, Sheila.
So in criminal law, at least in New York, and I guess throughout the United States, but especially in New York, equity and social justice are very important topics that are affecting the laws in New York right now. My office started an equity and social justice committee last year, of which I was selected to be a member. In 2019, the state of New York literally passed new laws affecting criminal justice. I think it's the biggest criminal justice legislation since the 60s. They enacted bail reform. They enacted new discovery laws that require prosecutor's office to turn over discovery in a much shorter time frame than previously. And these are all laws passed to ensure greater social justice in our criminal justice system. So those are definitely the trends that we are seeing now.
And I think some some trends that have occurred over the past few years in law reflect general trends we've seen in the business community and with information technology. For example, discovery in cases now is much more burdensome. I mean, you've got companies that are storing hundreds of gigabytes or terabytes of data that need to be reviewed. Artificial intelligence is being used in programs to review that data more quickly. I mean, I worked on a project that had a team of 400 staff attorneys reviewing data for a merger review by the government, and it was an extraordinary effort that took months, and that sort of volume of data is really changing the way that litigation is done, or administrative review and things like mergers is done. Another thing that I think is important to keep in mind is sort of laws change and businesses change the way they do business. It creates opportunity in law. I know a number of major firms in the United States have recently established marijuana practices, for example, because that area of law is significantly in flux. A number of states have legalized marijuana, some for medical use, some for recreational use. It's still illegal at the federal level. It creates a lot of complexity, and law firms have set up practices to focus on that. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that's just moving from prohibition essentially into the legal world. There's a lot of activity right now in financial transactions, PayPal and other services like that, moving away from Venmo, moving away from credit cards, or changing the way credit cards are used. Cryptocurrencies are something that is creating a lot of opportunity in law as well. So as there are trends in the business community, those almost always translate to opportunities and shifts in law as well. So if there's something you're particularly interested in technology, keep that in mind. But by the way, because of this, the trend of huge volumes of documents and digital information review and document review and transactions, it's become increasingly important for older attorneys to rely on the computer savvy of their young associates. So the more you understand how data is stored on computers and manipulated, I think the better you'll do, and your older colleagues at a firm will be very appreciative of your skill set.
Yeah, amazing. Like I said just before, it's so fascinating how all of these things are so interconnected and change together in many ways. So yeah, thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate that. I'm learning a lot, so I hope everyone else is. I'm going to turn it over to our audience. And so if there's anybody who has a question, feel free. You can either come off camera and ask the question, or come on camera, is maybe what I should say, come on camera and ask your question, or you can pop it in the chat if you feel more comfortable doing that. So please do not be shy. Yes, go ahead, Darren.
Hi, thanks so much to you all. It's really informative. I'm actually I'm a colleague of Kristen's and a careers advisor here at St Andrews. So a question I had, and I think it might be more aimed for Sheila, is at the current time in the UK, there have been some pretty unfortunately some pretty major cuts within things like legal aid. So the number of vacancies for people to either work as barristers or solicitors, particularly in areas of things like crime and human rights, is extremely tough to break into now because there's fewer and fewer vacancies. And I just wondered whether that trend might be similar in the US, or you're not really seeing that at all happening.
It depends on the location, I believe. I'm not entirely familiar with what's going on with the city budget, New York City budget. I think the negotiations are happening now, and I think that's going to be finalized at the end of July. Yeah. But yeah, that is one of the trends that we see no matter what in public service. Like, the amount of vacancies depends on the budget of the institution, of either the municipality, I work for a municipality, or the state, or the government, and whether there's funding for those vacancies. So I don't know what it is at the moment, but that definitely is something that gets affected, over the years. It's like the amount of jobs does depend on the budget of the government that is funding those positions.
Yeah, and thank you very much for that answer. I just guess just to all of you, really, it was just more of a general obviously since when you actually first came into the profession, do you get a sense it's more competitive generally just to break into a career as a lawyer nowadays, or pretty similar to when you first came into it?
Let me, if I may, give you the sort of big firm perspective here, which I think is actually quite encouraging. I was on a partner call yesterday, and one of the difficulties that was identified was our ability to attract and retain the best law students. And apparently there's intense competition out there for the good students that are graduating, to the point where our firm and other firms are having to resort to all kinds of inducements, such as bonuses before you even join the firm if you promise to join. The starting salaries for first-year lawyers went up because of that. Law firms kind of move in lockstep when it comes to salaries. And I forget what the starting salary is now, but it is absolutely astronomical. It's probably more than a partner was making when I first made partner. So it seems to be a good time to get into law school, and particularly graduating from law school, because if you're a good candidate, you'll find that the firms will be fighting over you. You'll be very, very desired, and all kinds of inducements will be thrown at you to join the firm. I was also surprised to see that our summer school class this year, as I'm sure you know, and the drill in American law schools is typically you will spend a summer at a firm that you plan to join after graduation, and that's where you'll sort of be tried out, and then people will see whether whether or not you're a good fit with the firm. I was surprised to see that our law school class for this coming summer is close to 100, which is a lot of law school students, certainly more than we've had in the past. And that reflects the fact that, notwithstanding the fact that a lot of the work that would have been done in the past by first-year associates is now automated, there still is a tremendous need for good young lawyers with the big firms. So if you go to law school and you do well, you'll find that the situation is going to be somewhat similar to when I was back in the early 90s. I was applying to law firms where law firms will come after you. And you'll find that you'll be in a situation where you're juggling a number of offers from very good law firms. So I think as far as the sphere of private practice, particularly at the big firm, is concerned, I think the picture is very optimistic right now.
Great, thank you very much, James, for that. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm on mute. Darren, thank you so much for your question. Really appreciate it. And James and Sheila, thanks for jumping in. I see Laura has a question. Oh, sorry. Did Richard?
Sorry, Kristen, if you don't mind,
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, two quick comments to follow up.
Yeah.
First, on sort of the public interest positions, they've always been under-resourced. There's never been enough money for those types of jobs. It's been very difficult to get. But I will say that law firms, top law firms, have an increased focus on pro bono work and require that their associates do a certain amount of pro bono work each year. It's a very, very important element of work at any major law firm in the United States. Part of the reason is it's part of the consideration for rankings of law firms. So just a sort of a base reason law firms want to make sure they have commitment to it. But for example, our firm gives 100 hours of billable credit for attorneys working on pro bono cases, whether it's death penalty cases, immigration cases. I worked on asylum cases, Social Security benefits cases, veterans benefits cases. So there is the opportunity for lawyers to do that kind of work at major law firms. And with regard to how competitive the law firm scene is today, it's important to keep in mind, if you're going to go to law school, that law firm salaries or lawyer salaries are sort of bimodal. Starting salaries at major law firms in the United States, the top 100 law firms, is around $190,000 a year right now. That's up 90% over the past 20 years. It's extraordinary, right? But that's only about 10% of the lawyers in the country get those positions. The other 80 to 90% of lawyers start off making $50,000 or $60,000 a year. So if you go to law school, think very, very carefully about what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, where you want to work, and understanding the financial reality of being a lawyer will hopefully help give you motivation for working hard and getting good good grades when you get to a law school, if what you want to do is work in a major firm. Not everyone does. It's not suitable for everyone. Obviously, some people, some terrific lawyers, are doing all sorts of other things, but I think that's something important to keep in mind.
Great,
Yeah,
thank you very much, Richard. Thank you.
Laura.
Hi, my name's Laura. I graduated in 2017. I went to do a graduate diploma in law in London and then my LPC, and I'm now in the US going to do an LLM and planning to practice in California. So I'm wondering what advice you can offer me going into my LLM year if I would like to ultimately end up in big law, kind of what I should be focusing on during my LLM and how I should be going through this pivot in terms of different countries.
Well, that's a great question, Laura, and you're going to have a great perspective, having gotten the law degree in the UK and then getting a law degree in the US and LLM. I got an LLM in international and comparative law. A lot of my colleagues in the Georgetown LLM program were international attorneys who were taking the LLM to prepare themselves for the US bar and qualify for the US bar. Ultimately, I didn't wind up practicing international and comparative law, but that's one thing that's important to keep in mind as you're selecting an LLM program. For example, if you're interested in tax law, there's a lot of tremendous LLM programs in tax law. If you're interested in government contract law, the area that I practice, a couple of LLM programs in that around the country. So picking an LLM program with a specific area of law in mind is more important than picking a JD program with a specific area of law in mind. This is a more advanced degree than that JD. And so, if you know the area of law you want to practice, my recommendation would be to really select an LLM program that matches that. I think it will help you in finding a position after the program.
And I think the same comments we made earlier on about the distinction of the law school you go to are important. Obviously, you want to go to the best possible, or at least the most recognized law school you can go to for your LLM program, because you'll find that the recruiting process at those schools will be kind of the same as for the JD students. You'll be in the same group of people, and so you'll go through the same interviews with the big firms and so on. So obviously the JD is much more important than the LLM, but at the bigger, better known schools, you'll be sort of thrown into that same pool, and you'll be treated as if you were a JD graduate. So to that extent, obviously, I think you want to obviously go to the best possible school you can go to, because they'll also have a much more developed recruiting program, and they'll set up interviews for you on campus, and there'll be callbacks on the firms and so on, if what you want to do is go to a big firm.
Thank you for that advice. I have committed to Berkeley, so hopefully I'm on that track. And
all right, very good.
And based on your recommendation of knowing what I want to study, they do offer specific certificates, so I'll think very carefully about which one I'm going to do. But is there any kind of extracurriculars you guys have mentioned the law review that I should be focused on, given that I only have that 1 year of US education to kind of show off on my resume post-grad?
Yeah, I think if you're an LLM student, the actual law review, the California law review won't be an option, but there should be an international law review or something like that, where you can get some experience. Ideally, if you could write a note that's published, that would help. I don't know if you'll have enough time during your LLM year, but certainly being on some sort of journal is definitely going to help you.
Thank you.
I agree with that completely, and congratulations on getting into Berkeley. It's a great program, and I'm sure you'll do very well there. But yeah, if you can find opportunities to do some writing, get published during that year in the area that you're focusing on during your LLM, that would be something worth pursuing.
Thank you both.
Excellent. Thanks so much for the question, Laura, and congrats on getting into Berkeley. Very exciting. Yes. And so we're actually coming up to the end of our time here together, which was a very quick hour. I certainly learned a lot, and thank you, Sheila, James, and Richard, so much for your insight and your wisdom, and for spending time with us today. I know that, yeah, we will walk away with a lot based on this conversation. So one just very quick last thing that I want to put out to everybody is that, and it was mentioned here, that the St. Andrews community is wide and vast, and people are doing amazing things. And Sheila talked about the importance of mentorship, the importance of gaining perspectives. And so for anybody on the call, or if you're listening to the recording, please make sure to check out St. Connect. And so St. Connect is the University of St. Andrews online global community. So it's got lots of students, alumni, contacts, lots of people who are doing very interesting things. So definitely get connected in that platform, and start connecting with people who are doing similar things and who are up to similar things in the world. So again, thank you so much to the three of you for your time and your perspectives, and wishing you all the best.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Take care.